to AT&T for inviting me here to share my perspectives today. Folks, for my entire career, I've been focused on one thing, which is designing and launching digital services. I'm passionate about it. I love doing it. I've launched the world's first video on mobile phones, the first multiplayer games on the web, the first mobile games in the United States. I even designed and built this gigantic online learning platform for Oprah Winfrey. I love doing this. Today, I get the opportunity to work with companies all over the world. I also work with governments and even universities to help them design their online strategy, their digital services. And when I talk to these companies and these organizations, they're all aware that 5G is coming. And they all know how strategically important, how vitally important 5G will be for the future of mobile services. And they understand that it's vitally important to companies like AT&T and all the other mobile operators around the world. But what's really interesting is that the companies I talk to, very often, they're unable to tell me how 5G will affect their own digital services. I'd be willing to make a bet. I'm willing to bet that half the people in this room can't tell me what the impact of 5G on their own company's digital services will be. This is vitally important. That's why you're here at this event. I'm going to spend the next few minutes telling you about my vision of what I think is going to happen to digital services with the advent of 5G. It's really important that we get this right because you see, every 10 years or so, mobile operators introduce a new generation of digital technology. We went from 2G to 3G, faster data speeds, and then to 4G recently. Each time, there's a gigantic transformation that hits the economy. In the early days, in the first couple of generations, that mostly occurred inside of the mobile networks. The telecom companies themselves and their vendors were affected by these transformations. But with the advent of 4G, we saw true internet standards combined with mobile, and it transformed the world. It actually transformed the entire economy. It's important to understand the implications of what happened in 4G. That's our template for what's coming next with 5G. You see, 4G drove what I call the smartphone decade, or you might even call it the iPhone decade. I call it that because I date the launch of the modern smartphone to 2007, which is the year when Apple introduced the first iPhone. I'm sure there's some folks in the room who disagree with that. They'd say, hang on, there were other companies that built smartphones way before Apple did. That's true. That's true. Those companies included Motorola, Nokia, Palm, Research in Motion. Those companies were not the evolutionary survivors of the 4G transition. Those companies failed to understand that 4G was about software ecosystems and rich developer networks. And as a result, they didn't make the evolutionary cut. Some of those companies were reconfigured. Some of them were chopped up and sold off in parts. Let's take a look at the companies that succeeded, the evolutionary survivors of the smartphone decade. This chart shows you the valuations of the world's most valuable companies, stack ranked by stock market capitalization. And you can see back in 2006, the year before the iPhone was introduced, the most valuable companies in the world were mostly energy companies, led by ExxonMobil. And in a way, that's perfect, because ExxonMobil is the direct descendant from John Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. There could be no better symbol of the industrial economy of the 20th century than ExxonMobil. So before the iPhone was introduced, these were the most valuable companies in the world. Just 10 years later, look at what happened to this chart. It is dominated by technology companies at significantly greater valuations than the energy companies. Now, some folks might say, hang on a second. Not all of those companies are smartphone companies. Famously, Microsoft and Amazon, they're not necessarily successful smartphone companies. That's true. What unites all of these technology companies is that they built robust, scalable software platforms to deliver digital services to mobile phones. In the smartphone decade, the number of people using the internet more than doubled. Back in 2007, there were about 1.8 billion people on the web. Today, that figure is more than 4 billion. The companies that were ready for that next wave, those 2.5 billion people who came through the iPhone decade, those companies were able to grow. Now, this chart is a little out of date. This chart is from August 2016. So since I knew I was coming to the AT&T Business Summit, I said, gee, let me take a look at the valuations and see if they actually grew or stayed the same. I sure hope they didn't decline. So I updated the chart back in July, and this is what happened. Just in 2 years since this chart was published, these companies have added, on average, more than $200 billion, more than $100 billion a year in stock market valuation. But I did this update in July, and then August happened, and I had to go back and redo my chart. Check this out. Just in the 1 month between July and August of this year, these companies grew spectacularly. Both Apple and Amazon breached the 1 trillion valuation threshold. And the other companies, again, added billions, hundreds of billions to their stock market valuations. Folks, what's happening is that Wall Street is sending a very clear signal. The stock market, in its wisdom, is telling us that it values software platforms that can scale to meet first 4G and now the 5G opportunity. This is not some short-term trend or some short-term fad. In fact, this trend's been around for a very long time. The merchant bank Ocean Tomo published a report that evaluated the components that make up the value of the most valuable companies in the world. They looked at the S&P 500, and they noticed that in 1975, almost 85%, 83% of the value of the companies on the S&P 500 was comprised of tangible assets, physical assets. But by 2015, that ratio had completely reversed. There's been an epic shift in the past 40 years away from physical assets, land, mineral resources, human labor, and capital, towards intangible assets, intellectual property of all sorts, including software, the knowledge in the heads of your employees, the talent, proprietary data assets, and proprietary business process. These are the drivers of economic value in companies today. So the companies that were successful in the transition to 4G, those companies were able to build globe-spanning businesses, what I call invisible information empires, on top of that 4G network. For the first time in history, we have companies that operate at a truly planetary scale. And when you talk to venture investors today, they want to see how your startup company can scale to the size of a unicorn, a truly global company. So that was the opportunity that was introduced in the 4G era. Now, some people talk about this shift towards software as dematerialization, dematerialization into software, dematerialization into pure information. I have a different term for it. I call it vaporized, because literally things are disappearing from our daily eyes. Right in front of us, we see things disappearing. Familiar objects, stuff that we use every single day, is vanishing in a puff of smoke. And it's now available like atmosphere. It's information that you can order on demand. You can download on demand. This might all sound a little fanciful, but every time you use your smartphone, you're vaporizing something. If you use Amazon's Kindle app, you're vaporizing books. Amazon now sells more e-books than hardbound and physical books combined. We vaporized the music industry. Streaming media, cloud-based streaming media services are now the largest and fastest growing driver of revenue for the music industry, and they account for the first uptick in revenue that the music industry has had in 10 years. Maps. Just think about this. 10 years ago, you used a physical map. Today, who would consider doing that? There's a whole generation of kids growing up that have grown up with smartphones. They will never know what it means to be lost in a foreign city now because of the smartphone. The game industry has been completely transformed by mobile. When I introduced the first mobile games in the United States back in 2000 and 2001, my friends in the console game business thought I was crazy, and they teased me about it. They said, come on, the mobile phone's a terrible place to play games. That was true back in 2000 and 2001. They weren't kidding. But I knew that the microprocessor in the phone and the screen display and the bandwidth and the network were going to increase, and eventually that phone in your pocket was going to be the primary place for people to play games. Today, that's true. The game industry is about a $138 billion industry worldwide. Today, more than half the revenue in that industry, $70 billion, is attributable to mobile games. Not only that, mobile is growing at 25% a year. It's by far the largest segment and the fastest growing segment of the game industry. It dominates PC games and console games. And something similar is happening in the television industry. My colleagues in the TV industry unfortunately spent the entire smartphone decade trying to fight a rearguard battle to preserve their old pay TV business model. And in doing so, they neglected the opportunity to build out a software platform for the delivery of on-demand services. They left that opportunity open to Netflix, Amazon, and the other streaming platforms. So when I say we're vaporizing things, what I mean is that we're replacing physical things with software. This process is not limited to maps or music or media. It actually means that we're replacing real physical items. Just think about all the consumer electronics products that you don't carry with you when you travel anymore because you've got that smartphone in your pocket. Your smartphone in the past 10 years has absorbed the functionality of 25 different consumer electronics devices. And for the companies that manufacture consumer electronics, they're also victims of the smartphone era. The companies that make GPS units and digital cameras and MP3 players, they experienced double-digit decreases in the sales of those products, even as smartphone sales increased 500-fold. My belief is that whatever can be vaporized will be. Whatever can be dematerialized and replaced with software will be. And I think that's going to cause us to rethink the way we make products. And I believe that this trend is going to accelerate in the 5G era, because every single product in the world has information embedded in it. And as products become information rich, that information wants to be liberated. So physical products begin to lose the characteristics of a physical good, and they start to take on the dynamics of a digital service. We have to rethink our products. So in sum, the story of the 4G era is that it launched the smartphone decade, and the companies that were prepared to meet that opportunity, the companies that had scalable software platforms that could scale to global level, the companies that took advantage of all these drivers, those companies grew to great size, great scale. So now let's take a look at 5G. What's coming next? I see 5 trends. Clearly, dematerialization, vaporization is one of them. Now let's talk about the second one, hyperconnectivity. I truly believe that in the 5G era, whatever can be connected will be connected. And of course, you know I'm talking about the Internet of Things. When we talk about the Internet of Everything, many people focus on smart devices. They're not wrong, that's a big opportunity, but I think if you just focus on smart devices, you're missing the bigger picture. Because it turns out that the Internet of Everything is a system of systems. And so to really make it work successfully, you need this whole stack of systems. Not just the smart devices, but also huge sensor networks embedded in the environment around us. And those networks, the sensor networks and those devices, well, they're connected to cloud computing platforms that can deliver dynamic digital services that generate huge amounts of data, what I call really big data. Data sets that are so large that we require the help of machines to understand and comprehend those systems. So the Internet of Everything is sort of a system of systems. And you need all of the components in this stack in order to do it well. That's one of the reasons why the early deployments of IoT were not so successful. By some estimates, 3/4 of the early IoT deployments failed. That's because we didn't have all the items in this stack, but now we do. So we're ready for the 5G era. Let's take a look at the scale and size of the transformation I'm about to tell you about. First, we're going to take the hundreds of millions of computers, the servers and the PCs that are out there today. They're already talking to billions of smartphones. In the smartphone era, the number of mobile devices doubled, and it will double again. It will grow from 4 billion to 8 billion in the next 10 years. There are, by some estimates, already 20 billion Internet of Things devices, smart speakers, smart light bulbs, and so forth. Already 20 billion deployed. That number is supposed to increase to 50 billion in the next 5 years, and beyond that grow to perhaps 80 or 100 billion connected devices. And then beyond this, over the course of the next 10 years, we will see the deployment of trillions of sensors in our roadways, in our cities, in our buildings, even inside of our bodies. All of these network devices, all of these connected things are going to generate enormous data sets, what the economist calls a data deluge. We're living through it right now. In the past decade, we've generated zettabytes of data. A zettabyte's a funny word. We used to measure data in the form of petabytes and exabytes, but by 2010 we needed a new word, a zettabyte. It's a 1 followed by 21 zeros. A million gigabytes of data. That's how much we generated in 2010. We've experienced a 40-fold increase in the amount of data that we generate already. And during the 5G era, you'll see these numbers double and double and double again. We will be generating hundreds of zettabytes in the 2020s. And that brings me to machine intelligence. These data sets are so large that we as human beings cannot comprehend them. They exceed our apparatus for comprehension. We require machine intelligence and cognitive computing to make sense of them. That's why it's no coincidence that you're hearing so much about artificial intelligence these days. The data sets require it. And that's why we say that data is the new oil. You'll hear pundits tell you that. What they mean by that is data is the most important asset in a company's business. It's the most important thing you can acquire, and that's why there's a mad scramble around the world to accumulate data assets. Those data assets train the artificial intelligence. They train your machine learning algorithms and make them better, so it can be a proprietary advantage. So even as we look at that scope and scale of all those devices, I think we're still not thinking big enough. Because in 5G, we're going to do something else, something extraordinary. See, when everything's connected, you can take a look at this diagram and draw a circle around the things in the middle. The things inside of that orange circle all have microprocessors, network connectivity, and so they're smart things. So I think we can make a kind of crude distinction here between the Internet of smart things and the Internet of dumb things. The dumb things are the ones that aren't connected, right? These are just products that sit there, like a can of soda, perhaps, or a bottle of wine. Turns out there's a lot of information in those products as well. Not everything can be connected. Not everything's going to have a microprocessor and a radio part inside of it. But everything has a digital identity. And this presents yet another opportunity in the next cycle, in the 5G cycle. For the past 2 years, I've been working with GS1 on a huge strategic project of great significance for every company that makes products, particularly consumer goods, foods, and so forth, what I would call things that are not inside of that circle of smart items. GS1, if you're not familiar with it, they are the global standards body for product ID. You might know of them as the company that issues barcode identity. They issue barcode identities to the tune of billions each year. But the project they asked me to work on is to find a way to unify digital identity with the physical identity that they have already mastered. You see, what happens is we design products. Typically, a product marketing team will design a product, and there's a lot of data generated, but then their product goes someplace, perhaps in Asia, to be built, to be manufactured, and all that digital data is stripped off, and all you're left with is an SKU inside of an inventory management system. And that's a real problem for e-commerce, because then they have a tough time reuniting the digital information together with that physical product ID. So this is a really difficult problem to solve. And it turns out that every product on the planet is surrounded by an invisible cloud of data. Data that includes all that rich media for marketing, all the product design, all the information about how to use it, the documentation, the information that tells you where was that product sourced from. Are those components actually counterfeit or real? Were those ingredients ethically sourced? Are they certified organic? Consumers care about these things. There's also the information about how to use the product. And you probably have noticed that a lot of products today come with a mobile app, and that mobile app helps you increase your usage of it. It actually increases the way you enjoy that product. There's also the ownership history. In the future, with our connected cars, I think it's reasonable to expect a person who buys a secondhand car to have the ownership history, all the repair history, transfer over. So we'll have to figure out a way to permission certain information that might be transferred to the next owner. There's also going to be information about product recalls, software upgrades, and software updates. So each product has a cloud of data around it, but today those two things are not unified, and I think it's a great opportunity. I'll show you an example. Last year I had the opportunity to work with Treasury Wines, which is a big wine grower in Australia, and they showed me something really cool. One of the wines that they make is called 19 Crimes. You might be familiar with it. They're selling about 3 million bottles a year in the United States. So 19 Crimes is based, their branding is based on the Australian origin myth of the convicts who were transported from the UK over to Australia. And they decided to build on that lore with this wine. But you know, a wine bottle is interesting. The label doesn't actually tell you that much. It tells you a little bit of information, but actually wine is an information-rich product. And so what the folks at Treasury Wine did is they built an augmented reality app. And when you scan that wine bottle, that character on the front comes to life and begins to tell you the story of the transport and how he got to Australia and so forth. It's a rich narrative, and it really enriches the bottle and the experience of enjoying that wine. But that's not all. The folks at Treasury Wine are focused on solving a really important problem for all makers of consumer products. The problem is that the product has to work harder these days. The product package has to work a little bit harder, has to become a channel of information to consumers. The reason for that is simple. Advertising, broadcast media, broadcast television, broadcast radio, these are in decline. These are in secular decline. That's a primary channel for consumer products companies for reaching consumers. The other big channel is retail, but retail shelf space is shrinking. And retailers themselves are creating their own private label products that are pushing branded products off the shelf. And so the consumer products companies are faced with an existential crisis, which is that their two primary channels to the consumer are shrinking. Therefore, the product itself has to become the new channel. And with digital identity in 5G, we will be able to achieve this. And so in the future, in the 5G world, when you walk into a grocery store, perhaps you'll have some kind of wearable, maybe a pair of glasses, that will already know your preferences, your diet preferences, your preferences on the origins of food, your preferences on whether things are certified organic or fair trade, and it will highlight those items on the shelf. It'll guide you directly to them. So you'll be able to be guided directly through the 40,000 products in the grocery store, directly to the products that meet your preferences. You'll see something similar happen in the world around you as you drive around. All that ambient data in the city around you will become visible or viewable. I call this detection without connection. You don't necessarily need to connect to that object to understand that ambient data if we get the digital identity associated with the physical identity. This is also going to be very important for robotics and automated systems because this data is machine readable. So in the future, you'll have fully robotized warehouses. You'll have ambient systems that track data and traffic in cities, and even space-based monitoring of ground installations. All these things will become possible when we fuse digital identity together with physical product identity and make it machine readable. All those intelligent systems based on the 5G network will be able to monitor all these products as they move through the supply chain. What's happening, folks, is that what we do with software models is changing. You can model anything in software, but in the past, those software models used to live on a computer or live on a network. Today they operate in the real world. They govern the choices that we see. And in 5G, this is going to advance. Those systems are going to become so smart, they're going to have so much data, they're going to know us so much better than we know ourselves that they'll be able to go from prediction to prescription. They'll start to recommend things for us. There's one fifth trend that I want to cover in the remaining minutes, and that's about re-centralization and decentralization. The companies that were the winners in the smartphone cycle understood that it wasn't really about the smartphone. It was the phone as a gateway to an ecosystem of software. And their software ecosystems grew to planetary scale. And as a result, we ended up with something that was definitely not in the original vision of the internet, which is highly centralized, huge data silos, these information companies with these gigantic platforms. And network effects means that there's kind of a law of increasing returns that helps these companies grow ever larger with a tremendous concentration of power to the point where they're able to foist proprietary standards on their partners and customers, lock them in, and impose high switching costs. Outside the United States, there's growing concern in some countries about what they call data colonialism and AI imperialism, whereby data is extracted from those citizens of those countries, used to train an algorithm in California or someplace else, and then that algorithm determines the choices that are available to those citizens. So there's rising concern about the growth of these companies. As I mentioned earlier, there's a question here about digital services in 5G. Every one of the big internet platforms is interested in extending its hegemony into other fields, other adjacent fields. Now the question is, who's next? Who are the next companies or the next industries that will be in the gun sights of these giant internet platforms? Everyone's aware of the enormous ambitions that the big internet companies have in healthcare. It comprises almost 20% of the economy, so it's a rich target. No company's had more of a voracious appetite than Google, Alphabet, who's made enormous numbers of investments in digital healthcare. Amazon was able to rock the grocery industry last June when they made the acquisition of Whole Foods. The auto industry is in the gun sights. Both Apple and Alphabet have huge ambitions in the automotive industry, and they must do it. They have no choice, because as average revenue per user on smartphones begins to flatten, they have to focus on average revenue per car. And so we might see that the software giants start to extend their hegemony into the motor vehicle and try to steal some of the value from the digital services in the car, leaving those automakers looking more like BlackBerry or Palm or Nokia, the companies that didn't make the evolutionary cut to software services. And every internet platform, even the Chinese internet platforms, have huge ambitions in digital payments. So the increasing concentration of these companies and the incredible growth has caused governments around the world to look carefully at these large internet platforms, in some cases imposing huge fines upon them. We've seen government action in China, India, and Russia. Even in the United States now, there's rumblings on the Capitol Hill about regulation. But I think everybody in this room would agree with me when I say regulation is not the solution. Regulation is the cause of unintended consequences. I don't think we want to see more industry regulation. I'm not quite sure that would solve the problem of intense concentration. On the internet, we say, build a tool, not a rule. Well, just in time, the tool has arrived. There's an antidote to heavy centralization, and that is crowdfunding of decentralization. When we talk about decentralized software systems, we have to talk about cryptocurrency. Now, lots of folks, when they think about cryptocurrency, they think about Bitcoin, and they realize there was a spectacular run-up in the price of Bitcoin last year, and then an equally spectacular decline in January of this year. And for a lot of folks, that was it, end of the chapter. They turned the page. They figured Bitcoin's over, cryptocurrency is over. They're wrong. They're wrong. You see, at the heart of Bitcoin, which is itself a decentralized currency, meaning it's not controlled by a central bank. It's not controlled by anyone. And at the heart of it, what makes it possible is the blockchain protocol. Some people call it the trust protocol, a distributed ledger technology where all the computers in the network have to arrive at consensus. So again, this cannot be controlled by any one person. About 8 years ago, software developers realized that you could do more than monetary transactions on a blockchain. It could be a platform for smart contracts. What's a smart contract? A smart contract is a self-executing contract written in software. It's a software program. If condition A is met, then transaction B can occur. And once they had that realization, they saw then that cryptocurrency platforms could start to emerge or maybe evolve into token economies, open economies controlled by no one, available to everyone, that will allow us to shift from a linear left-to-right supply chain towards something that's much more like a software ecosystem in the future. The mechanism for funding these token economies is called an ICO, initial coin offering. It sounds like an IPO, but it's very different. An IPO requires many quarters of profitable growth. For an ICO, many of the companies that have launched ICOs don't even exist. They just exist in the form of a white paper and a team that wants to go build something. And yet they've been able to raise tremendous amounts of money through the ICO process. In 2017, there were about 450 ICOs that raised a collective $5.6 billion for open source software infrastructure. And they did it in a number of fields, in dozens and dozens of fields, not just in finance, but also in advertising, media, also in energy and mining, and certainly many other fields, healthcare and so forth. So there are ICOs in just about every single industry last year. And these companies are raising money at a rate that is unprecedented. If you've ever raised money for a startup company, you know it can take months and months and months to raise just a single round of financing. But with an ICO, a company is able to raise millions, sometimes tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in a matter of days, sometimes in seconds. Brave raised $35 million in 30 seconds last year. Now, some folks think that this process came to an end in 2018 when the Bitcoin bubble busted, but they're wrong. They're wrong. In the first half of 2018, more than twice as much money was raised through the ICO process than in all of 2017. There's huge momentum in this space. There's enormous momentum for crowdfunding open source software platforms that are decentralized in their very nature. They are open source, they are controlled by no one, they are accessible to anyone. They are geographically unbound. They break us from that lock grip that Silicon Valley and other innovation centers had. And they are accelerating innovation. You know, when I want to predict what's going to come next, I look at where developer activity is. 10 years ago, developer activity was 100% on mobile apps. That was the most exciting place to be. Today, the most exciting place to be is cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency and token economies. When you go to developer meetups now, they're scheduled to have maybe 200 people show up. You'll see 600 or 1,000 people come. Overflowing capacity at these events. There is tremendous interest in this field. Let's see if I can put all 5 of these things together, all 5 trends together in the last remaining seconds. I believe in 5G, we're going to move from linear supply chains to open ecosystems, software ecosystems that define the way we make and transfer goods around the planet. Robotics is the example I'm going to use. There's nothing new about robots. They've been around since the 1980s, particularly in the automotive industry. But I'm using robots as an example because they're visible. Software automation is much bigger, but you can't see it. So I'm using this as a visible example. It's like that part of the iceberg that's above the water. Today's robots are safer. They have eyes, they have sensors, they can see us, they don't harm us, they won't hurt human beings. They're also cheaper. This Baxter robot costs about $22,000. They're also capable of feats of precision that humans can't even do. We're starting to see robot factories. This is an example from Adidas, the shoe manufacturer, sports shoe manufacturer. They call this the speed factory. It allows them to do mass customization of shoes very, very rapidly. But in the future, you can imagine that there'll be all sorts of robot factories, so-called dark factories, that do custom manufacturing for a bunch of partners. And they might connect to a full, rich ecosystem. We're starting to see robotic ports. Maersk Shipping and 8 other shipping companies now have designed robotic container ships. Of course, there are robot trucks being developed right now by Otto, which is a company that's owned by Uber, and Waymo, which is owned by Google. We also know about robot warehouses. JD.com, a big online retailer in China, just announced the first fully robotized distribution center. And there are companies that propose to deliver things. The last mile delivery will also be done by robots. So you can imagine a fully automated supply chain, building products and delivering them to us. I know it sounds like science fiction. I know some folks in the room are like, wait a minute, this is like too futuristic for me. But the fact is, every system I just showed you exists, or it's being planned right now. They're all siloed, though. They're not integrated. And to integrate them, what we need are the following things. These are the foundational elements for this new software-defined supply chain, beginning with unified, rock-solid data about identity, unifying digital and physical identity. That information has to be machine-readable, and it has to be encoded into the blockchain so that we can trust the transactions that are done by automated agents and robots on our behalf. And I believe that these systems are going to be crowd-funded through the token process, through the ICO process. And so we'll see the growth of large-scale open software platforms to do combat or maybe to challenge those gigantic incumbent internet platforms. The great news for the people in this room is this space is wide open. There is no dominant company. There is no 20,000-pound gorilla that dominates this field. It's wide open for the people who are willing to take the initiative, who have the vision to master the 5G era. Now go forth and conquer that opportunity, folks. Go do it. I am Robert Tercek, the author of Vaporized, the 2016 International Book of the Year. Thank you very much and enjoy the summit. Thank you.